At 4:30 in the morning on August 29, 1994, a passing motorist spotted flames rising from a house in the small town of Vinton, Virginia. He called it in. The fire department responded quickly enough to save the structure before it was completely gone. What they found inside would haunt every person in that building for the rest of their lives. A mother, strangled and set on fire on the living room couch. Upstairs, a father dead in his bed with a gunshot wound to the head. In the next room, 2 little girls, 11 years old and 3 years old, shot at close range in their beds. 4 members of one family, wiped out in a single night. Police looked at the scene and saw what appeared to be a murder. The father was facing prison. The gun was right there beside him. It seemed to tell its own story, but nothing about this scene was what it appeared to be. And by the time investigators uncovered the truth, a truth buried in audio tapes, burned jeans, a slipped remark, and a forensic detail about a gun barrel, what they found was something far darker than any murder. It was a massacre, planned, deliberate, and carried out by a man the family had trusted completely. The Hodges family lived in Vinton, a quiet small town just east of Roanoke in Virginia's Blue Ridge foothills. It was the kind of community where people knew their neighbors, where kids played outside, and where a family's troubles could stay private as long as everyone cooperated. William Blaine Hodges was 41 years old. He had worked for the United States Postal Service until he was caught embezzling from his employer. It had cost him his career and was about to cost him his freedom. He was facing 6 months in federal prison and a significant restitution payment that, by all accounts, he simply didn't have the money to make. That financial and legal pressure hung over the household. His wife, Teresa Lynn Hodges, was 37. Whatever troubles Blaine had brought to their door, Teresa was managing the household and raising their 2 daughters. Winter was 11, curious, energetic, just starting to navigate the world as a preteen. She had a t-shirt from her school, William Byrd High School, that she wore often enough for her family to recognize it immediately. And then there was little Anna, 3 years old, still a baby really. They were a family under strain. But they were a family, and they had a close friend they trusted, a man the girls called Uncle Earl. When firefighters brought the blaze under control and investigators moved through the house, the scene appeared to tell a clear story. Downstairs, Teresa's body was found on the couch. She had been strangled and doused with diesel fuel, and the fire had reached her. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Blaine was lying dead on the bed. He had a single gunshot wound to the left temple. Beside him lay a .22 caliber revolver, but with its barrel removed. In the next bedroom, Winter and Anna were found in their bed. Both had been shot at close range. Little Anna had sustained mild burns from the fire that had begun downstairs. Investigators also noted that the telephone lines had been deliberately cut, and traces of a petroleum-based accelerant were found throughout the house, which basically means this fire had been set intentionally. The initial theory formed quickly, and it was the obvious one. Blaine Hodges was days away from reporting to prison. He was facing financial ruin. He had no clear way to pay what he owed. Under that kind of pressure, desperate people do terrible things. To put it simply, police theorized that Blaine had snapped. He had killed his wife and his daughters, doused the house in fuel oil, set it alight, and then shot himself. Case closed, pending autopsy. Except the autopsy changed everything. Dr. David Oxley, the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner of Western Virginia, examined all 4 bodies. And one thing struck him immediately. Blaine Hodges had been dead considerably longer than the rest of his family. His body showed a level of decomposition that the other 3 simply did not. The medical examiners estimated that Blaine had been killed at least 12 hours before Teresa, Winter, and Anna. That single finding demolished the murder self-harm theory entirely. A dead man cannot strangle his wife, shoot his daughters, douse a house in diesel fuel, and set it on fire the following night. Blaine Hodges wasn't the killer. He was the first victim. Now investigators had a murder quadruple homicide, staged to look like a murder self-harm by someone who had planned every detail carefully, and that raised the most alarming question of all: who had been inside that house for the time between Blaine's death and the family's? Before we answer that, let's take a moment to know about the gun. The .22 caliber revolver found beside Blaine's body had its serial number filed off and its barrel removed. Both moves were designed to prevent identification and ballistic tracing. But forensic supervisor William Conrad noticed something that the killer hadn't counted on. The bullets recovered from the bodies had spiral marks called lands and grooves, the kind left by a gun barrel as a bullet passes through, 6 lands and grooves specifically. The reference manual for the gun found at the scene indicated its pattern should produce 8 lands and grooves. Conrad initially concluded the gun was a plant, a drop gun, left deliberately to mislead investigators. He was partially right. The barrel had been removed to prevent ballistic matching, but the gun itself was connected to the killings in ways the killer hadn't anticipated. Later, working on an unrelated case, Conrad happened to test fire another weapon of the same make and model. The bullets it produced had 6 lands and grooves, not 8. The reference manual had been wrong. The gun found at the scene was almost certainly the murder weapon after all, and the cartridge casings found in the crime scene, when compared through firing pin marks to casings found in a vehicle connected to the suspect, told the rest of the story. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before any of that, the suspect had already given himself away with his own mouth. Earl Conrad Bramblett was born on March 20, 1942, in Sweetwater, Texas. By the time he crossed paths with the Hodges family, he was a 50-something man with a job at a sign company in Virginia, a motel room with no fixed address, and a decades-long history that his new friends knew almost nothing about. To the Hodges family, Earl was a trusted presence. He frequently stayed with them. He ate with them. He spent enough time in that house that Winter and little Anna called him Uncle Earl. He was woven into the fabric of their daily life, but behind that persona was something else entirely. Earl Bramblett had a documented history with young girls that stretched back at least to the 1970s. 2 women who would later testify at his trial said that in that decade, when they were 11 and 14 years old respectively, Bramblett had given them alcohol and essayed them. He had also been a suspect in the 1977 disappearances of 2 14-year-old girls named Tammy Akers and Angela Rader, both of whom had worked for him at the time. They were never found, and in a chilling detail that would surface later, Bramblett reportedly told friends that he wished he had not hurt Tammy, unprompted, years after she vanished. None of this was known to the Hodges family. They had welcomed him as family. Now, when investigators began questioning people close to the Hodges family, they asked Earl Bramblett to come to the station for an interview, and surprisingly, he came in and he seemed genuinely upset. He appeared to be grieving. Police told him carefully that the family had died in a fire. They said nothing about the violence. They said nothing about the murder self-harm staging. No details about how anyone had died, just that there had been a fire and the family was gone. And then Earl Bramblett punched a file cabinet in apparent rage and said, "The sorry son of a bitch had a beautiful family. He did them and he did himself." The room went still. He did them and he did himself. A murder self-harm reference from a man who had just been told there was a fire, who had been told nothing about how anyone died, who had no way of knowing that theory even existed unless he was the one who had set it up. Special Agent Barry Cassie of the Virginia State Police knew in that moment. The information about the murder self-harm staging hadn't been released to the media. It hadn't been shared outside the police force. The only way Earl Bramblett could know it was if he had been inside that house when those people died. Investigators kept their composure and continued the interview. And then, a little later, Bramblett did something equally damning. Out of nowhere, with no apparent prompt, he turned to the officers and asked, "Are you going to charge me with murder?" Nobody had mentioned murder. Nobody had accused him of anything. He had just arrived. He had just expressed his grief. And now he was asking about murder charges. Cassie kept his face neutral. He needed more than words. He needed evidence. He thanked Bramblett and let him go. But the investigation now had a name. What followed was 2 years of painstaking forensic work that built the case against Earl Bramblett, piece by careful piece. First, the witness. 3 days after the fire, police set up a roadblock near the Hodges house at the same time the blaze had started, around 4:30 in the morning, hoping to catch anyone who had driven past the house that night. A woman came forward. She said she had seen a vehicle pull out of the Hodges driveway around the time of the fire. She remembered it because it was so distinctive, an old white pickup truck with a black tailgate. Earl Bramblett drove an old white pickup truck with a black tailgate. Police returned to his motel with a search warrant. As he stood by and watched, they searched his room and his truck. In the front seat of that distinctive pickup, they found several .22 caliber shell casings, same brand, same caliber as the casings at the murder scene. Then came the time card. Bramblett worked at a sign company. He was scheduled to start his shift at 5 a.m. on the morning of August 29th, the same morning the fire had been set. His time card showed he had punched in at 5:08 a.m., 8 minutes late enough to have driven from the Hodges house, set the fire, and made it to work. And the entry on that time card? Someone had tried to black it out, completely obscure the time he had clocked in. Forensic analysis using infrared light recovered the hidden number, 5:08 a.m. At his workplace, investigators found more. A pair of jeans had been discovered soaking in water in the bathroom, noticed only because water was running under the door and a coworker went to check. Those jeans smelled of the solvent used at the sign company, but when forensic scientists analyzed them in the lab, they found something else too: fuel oil, the same type of petroleum-based accelerant used to douse the Hodges home. And in a dumpster at the same workplace, alongside other documents belonging to Bramblett, investigators found something that stopped them cold: a t-shirt, William Byrd High School, class of 2001. It had belonged to 11-year-old Winter Hodges. It was missing from the crime scene and completely unaccounted for. Only Earl Bramblett had access to both Winter's shirt and that dumpster. And then came the DNA. A pubic hair found in the bedroom where Winter and Anna were discovered was tested. It matched Earl Bramblett. Piece by piece, the picture assembled itself. But there was still the question of why. Facing increasing pressure from investigators and apparently beginning to believe something might happen to him, Bramblett had mailed a box to his sister in Indiana. Inside the box were audio cassette tapes, his personal diaries, recorded in his own voice. He had told her, "If anything ever happens to me, send these to the police." When she heard her brother was in serious trouble, she did exactly that. What investigators heard on those tapes was the confession that no courtroom would ever extract from Earl Bramblett in person. On the tapes, Bramblett spoke openly about his feelings toward Winter Hodges. 11-year-old Winter, the girl who called him Uncle Earl, who had grown up knowing him as a trusted adult in her life. He described a sexual attraction to her in his own voice, without shame or apparent awareness of what it revealed about him. And then came the delusion. Bramblett had become convinced, paranoid, obsessively, completely convinced, that Blaine Hodges, facing prison and desperate for money, had become a police informant. Bramblett believed that Blaine was using Winter to lure him into a trap, that the entire family was conspiring to set him up for child molestation charges that, once filed, would presumably generate enough civil lawsuit money to pay off Blaine's embezzlement restitution. There was no evidence this was true. None. It was a paranoid fantasy constructed by a predator trying to rationalize what he was planning to do. In his mind, Blaine had backstabbed him. In his mind, the family he had been welcomed into as a trusted uncle had turned against him. In his mind, killing them all was self-defense against a conspiracy. That was Earl Bramblett's motive. A delusion. A paranoid fabrication wrapped around the documented fact that he had been sexually drawn to an 11-year-old child and that he feared being exposed for it. Using the evidence, the tapes, and the forensic timeline, investigators were able to reconstruct the events of those final days for the Hodges family. On Saturday, August 27, 1994, Bramblett was at the Hodges house visiting Blaine. Teresa and the children were out shopping. While he was alone with Blaine, Bramblett pulled out his .22 Magnum pistol and shot Blaine Hodges in the head. When Teresa came home from shopping with the girls, Uncle Earl was waiting. He told her that Blaine, despondent over his impending prison sentence, had needed some time alone. He took off. He needed space. And then, because he wanted to keep them calm and away from the house while Blaine's body grew cold in the upstairs bedroom, Earl Bramblett did something that no one who heard it could make sense of at first. He bundled Teresa and the two girls into his truck and took them camping in the nearby mountains. They drove off together. A mother and her two daughters in the truck of the man who had just murdered their husband and father, going camping. They had 24 hours left. The following day, Sunday, August 28th, Bramblett resumed. He strangled Teresa Hodges. Then he shot Winter and little Anna. He placed Blaine's body downstairs, arranged to support the murder-suicide narrative, removed the barrel from the gun, filed off the serial number, and staged the scene to look like a husband and father who had snapped under the weight of his legal troubles. Then he doused the house with diesel fuel, set it alight, got into his white pickup truck with the black tailgate, and drove to work. He arrived 8 minutes late. The Hodges murders were not the beginning of who Earl Bramblett was. They were, in a horrific way, a continuation of a pattern that had apparently started decades earlier. A pattern of violence against children and young women, one that had gone largely unpunished for his entire adult life. and as mentioned, it took investigators nearly 2 years to build the full case. Bramblett had relocated to South Carolina in the interim, but Virginia authorities had never stopped watching him. He was arrested in July 1996. The trial began in 1997. The prosecution presented the slip in the interview, the time card, the jeans soaked in accelerant, the bullet casing matching, the t-shirt from the dumpster, the DNA, the audio tapes, played for a jury in Earl Bramblett's own voice, describing his attraction to Winter Hodges, outlining his paranoid belief in a conspiracy against him, telling the story in his own words. The defense had very little to work with. The jury deliberated for 1 hour. On December 16, 1997, Earl Conrad Bramblett was convicted of capital murder, 3 counts of first-degree murder, arson, and 3 counts of using a firearm in the commission of a felony. He was sentenced to death. He appealed. A clemency petition was filed with Virginia Governor Mark Warner. The U.S. Supreme Court was asked to intervene. Every avenue was exhausted. On April 9, 2003, Earl Bramblett was brought to the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia, to be executed. He chose the electric chair over lethal injection, not because he had any preference for one over the other on its merits, but as a deliberate act of protest. He was 61 years old. His final words, "I didn't murder the Hodges family. I've never murdered anybody. I'm going to my death with a clear conscience. I am going to my death having had a great life because of my 2 great sons, Mike and Doug." The electric chair was activated. Earl Bramblett was pronounced dead. Blaine Hodges was 41 years old. He had made a serious mistake, stealing from his employer, and he was facing the legal consequences. He did not deserve to die for it. Teresa was 37. She had no idea that the family friend who drove her and her daughters to the mountains that Saturday was the man who had just killed her husband. Winter was 11. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she trusted the man who called himself her uncle. Anna was 3 years old. They had 24 hours from the moment Teresa came home from shopping to the moment Earl Bramblett returned. 24 hours that they spent unknowingly with their killer because he had convinced them everything was fine. The case broke open not because of one single piece of evidence, but because of the accumulation of all of it. A slip of the tongue in an interview, a time card someone tried to destroy, a pair of jeans left soaking in a bathroom, a t-shirt in a dumpster, a DNA match, and audio tapes that a man had recorded in his own voice because he never truly believed anyone would hear them. And somewhere in Indiana, his sister heard about the trouble her brother was in and made a decision. She sent those tapes to the police. The Hodges family got justice because of the investigators who refused to accept the first story the crime scene told them. And because forensic science, patient, methodical, and indifferent to what killers wanted to say, told the truth anyway. What do you think about this case? Earl Bramblett went to the electric chair still claiming his innocence. Was justice served? And what about Tammy Akers and Angela Rader, the 2 14-year-old girls who disappeared in 1977 and were never found? Do you think Bramblett was responsible? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this case moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe. These victims deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.